Welcome everyone to the What's New webinar for the release of Flare 2021 R3 and MadCap Central. Hope that you all have been doing well. My name is Jorgeo Catolico, and I'm excited to be joined by my colleague Keaton Lullo, who is a fellow customer success manager here at MadCap. During this webinar, we'll be walking through the new features, and we're so excited to show you all what we all came out with. So before we get started, just a few quick notes. The webinar will be recorded and emailed to all registrants. So if you want to review any details or want to rewatch this webinar later, we got you covered. There is also a question panel in the GoToWebinar panel to ask questions throughout the session, and we'll try to get to them at the very end. So on our agenda today, we'll first talk about the branching support enhancements in Flare and Central. We'll talk about what it looks like to use branching in your Flare project and the new buttons in the interface to support that. We'll talk about reviewing your branches, building them, and also creating a site from them in MadCap Central. And then we'll log into Central to show you the updates that we made there as well, such as the new site profiles and topic review filtering enhancements. So before we jump into Flare to cover branching enhancements, I just want to give a quick overview on what branching is to get everyone up to speed and talk about why it's useful. So if you're not using branching yet, we encourage you to use it, and here's why. So first, what is branching? Well, branching isn't anything that MadCap created, and it isn't only a feature found in MadCap Central. So branching is a feature of source controls like Git, Team Foundation Server, Subversion, and Central. And it essentially allows you to create a variation of the main condition of your project. So when you think branching, most people think of it like a tree. Although it's not exactly like a tree, try to think about it like this. So imagine a tree, and that tree, of course, has a trunk. And that trunk is the main project branch. So that's the project that you are currently working in, and it's the original state of the files. Now, growing out of that trunk, you then have these other branches. And those are the branches that are the different variations of your project. So maybe you have a different branch for a future release or a branch for each of the new features that you'll be documenting. So you can work separately in these branches without affecting the tree trunk or the main branch. And you can even merge these branches into the main branch when they're ready. So at a high level, that's a good analogy that helps conceptualize what branching is. Now, why use branching? So there are a lot of advantages to branching, but most importantly, branching allows you to work in a continuous parallel development. Now, I'm sure that many of you technical writers have experienced this, where as version 1 is coming out, you're already writing up new features for the version 2 release cycle, or even for features for the release after that. And you may not know what features are actually going to be implemented in the next release, but you still have to be writing about all these things in case they do get included. So instead of having all these future features in your main project space, you can put them in their own separate space that is a branch that you can work in parallel to the main project branch. Branching also helps support agile development environments. So if you have releases frequently, branching can help you since you can be working in these separate branches for new content. And whenever that new content or feature is included in a release, that branch can be quickly merged into the main branch at any point, ready to get published to the end user. Sure, you may be able to accomplish managing different versions in a single project by using things like conditional tagging and excluding and including the condition content depending on the version. But this is kind of prone to user error, and keeping track of a lot of conditions can be clunky and it can blow up the project. So in turn, branching reduces the need for complex conditions, since you don't have to create tags for the different versions and features. And it also keeps your project organized, since you can keep files in development in a separate space from your main or production branch. For archiving and versioning purposes, branching is also helpful. After a release, instead of exporting or copying the project and saving it somewhere else, you can instead archive that version of the documentation and save it as a branch that you can easily refer back to. It's kind of like a snapshot in time of your content. And the last reason why you should use branching is the ability to review your topic files in a branch. And you could even build an output of that branch in development for internal viewers so that it can be reviewed separately from your output in production. And we'll show how this is done with MadCap Central today. So lots of good reasons to use branching. I'll now be passing it to my colleague Keaton to show how this would all be done in MadCap Flare.
All right, thanks, Gio. All right, so on the left, you'll see an arrow pointing downward, and this arrow represents time. So if you're using Git or now Central, you would be using branching based on this model. Because with Git, you always have this master branch as the start, and you have the option of creating lots of other branches if you want. So with GITFLOW, the way to think about the master branch would be the original main branch. So think about the content you have published and what you have out there for your audience to see. If we were to simplify it, let's think of this blue dot as the published version 1 of your content. So that blue dot, that's what your audience can see. So with Flare and branching, you often don't really work in the master branch. That is the way the GITFLOW model is designed. You're going to be working in other branches and merge that work into your master when you're ready to publish the updated information for end users. So step 1 would be to create a new branch. And when you create a new branch, you'll be creating it based off of an existing branch. And in my picture, I've done that. I've created a new branch called release based off the master branch, and it starts as an exact replica of that master branch. So if the master branch represents the version of content that's available to your readers, this release branch can represent what's coming next. Or maybe you can say it's version 2 if the master branch is version 1. So then based on this release branch, you can now create multiple other branches. And in my example, those are feature branches, features 1, 2, and 3. But in the real world, you would probably choose more descriptive names, such as the name of the upcoming feature. But I've gone ahead and created these new branches here for upcoming content development based on the release. Now, the other thing to mention here is when you create a branch, you also want to publish or push that branch. Since we're working with Git, there is always a local repository which is on your machine and a remote repository. And in our session today, we're focusing on Central as that remote repository. So all of your work will be local, but you also have to push that work into MadCap Central, which is essentially your standard Central workflow. Update locally and then push to remote. So this way, if you decide you want to start working on feature 1 content, you can switch to that branch in Flare, make your changes, and then push those changes to the remote branch. Okay, so now we'll say that time is going by and we still have our master branch and these other branches that we're working in. And so as you're working in these branches, you're committing and syncing changes to those branches in Central. And at this point, these are essentially separate workspaces for the same project. But at some point, you receive word or decide that feature 1 is definitely going into the next release. So in Flare, you would do a merge of the feature 1 branch into the release branch, and then you would push that release branch up to the remote repository. Now, obviously, this idea of what gets merged into the release will be different for every company. For example, if your company develops software, maybe it's based on what the developers decide is going into the next release. So you would merge that feature 1 into the release branch and then do a push. So now we'll see that we've merged feature 1 into the release, and then we can continuously merge that release branch into these other 2 branches. And that's because we're still working on them and we want to keep them up to date. So by doing this, features 2 and 3 will now have received all of the updates made to feature 1. So everything is staying current. So now as time goes on, you may create additional branches as new features or potential future versions of your content come into play. And you can see in my example, I have added 2 more branches, features 4 and 5, and we're working in them. And maybe it's decided that only features 1, 2, and 3 are done and will make it into the next release. So then we would merge those feature branches into our release branch and merge the release branch into our master branch and push. So up here, this first blue dot, this would be our version 1. And the second blue dot, this would now be our version 2. And then it continues. You can continue to create more feature branches and work in them, and the merging continues. Also, as we create new feature branches, we can do this based off of the release branch. So this way they're starting and will be created with all of the content for the release. Now, the other thing you may do, here we go. The other thing you may do is after you merge these feature branches in and they become part of your master, you can choose to delete them if you don't need to keep them around. And that's because all of their content will now live within the master branch. So that's more of the big picture concepts. So let's take a look at Flare and see the updates we've made to help support this functionality. All right, so the first thing that we'll notice when you're looking at the latest release of Flare is that if you open up a project that's connected to MadCap Central, you will now see a status bar in the bottom right-hand corner of Flare. Now, if you don't see this status bar, we can always go to our view ribbon, then select status bar here, and then it will display. But this status bar is really handy because it reduces the number of clicks to execute source control commands. And it also gives us some great insights as to the state of our project with regards to source control. So the first option we'll see here, this pencil button, this is going to show us our pending changes, meaning this will show us how many files we've updated locally within Flare that have not yet been committed to our local repository. So this is nice because it saves us time and clicks as we no longer need to select the source control ribbon and then select pending changes in order to see those files we've updated locally. But what we'll do is we'll just make a change to a file. So I'll make a change. I'll say this is new content. We'll save. So now once we've saved, we'll see that there's that check mark in Flare letting us know that we've made a change. But we'll also notice back at our pending changes button that there is now a 1 displaying. So this is handy because it gives us kind of a real-time feed and will show us how many files we've changed locally that have not yet been committed. And if I actually click this button, this will pull up our Source Control Explorer, which will not only show us which topic we have changed, but where it resides within our Flare project. So I'll go ahead and commit this change. And once we've committed, we'll see that there is no longer a 0 next to our pencil, and there is now a 1 in the button to the right of that. Now, this button here, this is our synchronize button. And if I click it, this will execute a sync with MadCap Central. But this also gives us some great information. For example, we'll see here that there is a 1 next to an arrow pointing up. And that means that there is 1 local commit that we have not yet pushed up to MadCap Central. We'll also see that there is a 0 with an arrow pointing down, which would let us know if other users have pushed changes to Central that we need to pull down into Flare. So this is really great because it gives us a window into our repository, and we can see what needs to be pushed up from Flare and what needs to be pulled down from MadCap Central. And really, once we have 0s across the board here, we know that our Flare project is completely up to date with our repository. Now, this next option here, this is our branch button. And this is handy because, for one, it will show us which branch we're working in. But also, if we click it, it'll pull up our branch management dialog. And just like with many things within Flare, there's always a couple of ways that we can get to somewhere. So if we go to our source control ribbon and select branch, this will also pull up that branch management dialog. But this dialog has some great functionality to support branching. So for one, it will give us a list of all of our branches that we have. And we'll notice here that currently we only have the master branch, which would be the default when you're working with MadCap Central. We'll see that we're working on this master branch locally. And if I switch over to the remotes, we'll see that we are pushing that master branch into MadCap Central. So from this dialog, we also have the ability to create new branches. We can quickly switch between our branches, and we can also delete branches if we don't need them around anymore. But let's say that we have a new release that's going to be coming up, and our developers want to add some new features to our product. Well, now we'd be able to document information about that feature in a branch and manage it separately from our master. So what we'll do is we'll first create a branch. We'll open up our branch management dialog and create a new branch. Now, being that this will be our fourth feature, I'll call this feature 4. And this option here, this is really handy because this allows us to continue or to start working in this branch immediately once we create it. So we'll create this branch. And now we'll see that our feature 4 branch is displaying in our branch management dialog. We'll see that we're working on it locally. And if I switch to remotes, we'll see that it is not yet in our remotes list. It hasn't been pushed or published into MadCap Central just yet. So everything that we're working on now will be local. We'll see down in our management button, our branch button, we'll see that we're working in feature 4. So now we can start documenting our information about feature 4. So we'll add some information and we'll just drop in some supporting text. And now we'll just save our change, and then we can commit and push our changes into Central. So we'll go ahead and run a commit. And then we're going to be pushing or publishing our feature 4 branch up to Central. Now, the reason that this is important is once we push this branch into Central, it will now reside within Central. So this way, other Flare users would be able to pull down this branch in their instance of Flare and start working within that branch. So this way, we can have several users all collaborating on these different branches, pushing and pulling, and everyone can stay in sync. So that way, we really do have those 2 separate workspaces for the same Flare project. And now, once we've pushed our branch, for one, we'll see that it is now showing in our remotes list. So it has been pushed to Central. But what we can also do within Flare is I can just quickly switch between our branches, and this will show us the different states of our files. So we'll see in the master branch, we no longer have that feature 4 information, and that's because we're handling it in its own branch. But let's say here, so now we've been documenting about feature 4 in our branch, but then we decide it's time for release, and feature 4 is going to make its way into this release. So now we would be merging in feature 4 into our master branch. And to do that, we'll go to our source control ribbon and select merge. And this is going to say, this is basically telling us, do you want to merge feature 4 into master? Yes, so we'll click OK. And our merge was a success. So now we'll see that we're working within our master branch here, and we now have all of our updated feature 4 information. So at this point, we're able to push our master branch up to MadCap Central, and we can also publish our master branch so our end users can now read about our great new feature. And once we've done that merge, we can always hop back into our branch management dialog and then delete this feature 4 branch, as it's not really needed at this point, being that all of its content lives within our master now. So that's a high-level look at the updates we've made within Flare to support branching. So I'll pass things back over to Gio so we can see what updates we've made in Central.
Thank you, Keaton. That was great. So now that we've went through a working cycle of branching and we merged a branch into our master branch that's in production, we're starting to work on documenting the next batch of features for the next release. So I have another branch that I'm working on called Feature 5, and I need its topic in my Feature 5 branch to get reviewed by a subject matter expert. And we could do that through the review cycle here in MadCap Central. So before this release, we only supported being able to review topics from the master branch. but now we can review topics from the other branches that we create in our Flare project. Now, first in Flare, you'll want to switch to that branch that you'd like to review. So currently I'm in my master branch. I don't have that feature 5 topic in this branch, so I'll hit this drop down here and I'll select feature 5. And now that I've switched to my feature 5 branch, my feature 5 topic appeared. I could open that up, and then I could send this out for review here. Now the workflow hasn't changed to send this topic off. Just because I'm in a branch, I don't have to do anything different. Just like I always have to send a file for review, I would go into the review tab and then select send for review here. And then I would select the files that I want to include for review and then select my subject matter expert to send this off. Now, since I've already switched to this feature 5 branch, I don't have to specify what branch to send this topic from. Flare already knows to send it from this branch since we're already here. Now, to save us some time, I've already sent this topic into Central beforehand. So let's go into Central and check out what it looks like to review a branch. All right, so I've logged into Central as the subject matter expert that just received a review file. And you'll see that after I open up this topic in this view here, it now specifies what branch this topic came from here at the top. So it says feature 5. Now this is helpful because it just lets your subject matter expert know what branch this topic may be for, so that they know that it's for a future release or an upcoming version if you happen to name your branch after that. And now the subject matter expert doesn't have to do anything special to edit this topic. They will make their edits by typing into the lightweight editor. So I will just make a quick edit and then I'll add some text. I'll put this is how you use feature 5, step 1, step 2, step 3. And now that I'm done editing this topic, I'll go ahead and select submit. Now, because this topic has to be approved by the Flare author back in Flare, I will then now jump back into Flare here. So I'm back as the author. And then if I open up my file reviews inbox that's found here on the review tab, I will see that review file that was sent back to me. And I'll also see what branch this review file came from here. So that's very important that we see where that what branch this review file came from, because before we actually open and we accept this review file, it's important that you want to switch to the correct branch where it originated from. So since I'm still in my feature 5 branch here, which is where we want to be, I will go ahead and accept this change. And then I will accept the file. And now this feature 5 topic in my branch has been reviewed by my subject matter expert. It's now ready and it can be merged into our release branch whenever that feature is implemented in the future release. Central also supports building outputs for specific branches, whereas before you were only able to build the output from the master branch. This way we can build and then preview what the HTML5 or PDF output would look like with that new content that we're working on in a separate space from the master branch or release branch. And we can also keep those builds saved and organized in a nice clear view. So I'll jump back into Central here. I've then opened up my project and I will click on the Builds tab, where you will see that the interface has changed a bit. So targets from the project are no longer shown on the left side of the page. And we did this so you could have a better overview of all of the builds for your project. Now with this view, you don't have to click through each target to look at the kept builds. But if you do want to just view the builds from a specific target, we do have these columns here so that you could use these to essentially sort the builds. So if I just want to see all the builds for my engineer target, I can select this target column and then I can find them all here in this list. Also, there are now tabs in the toolbar, including this builds tab to display the builds that we have completed and kept. And you'll find your scheduled builds here under the schedules tab. So the process for selecting a target to build has changed with this release. To the right here, in the top right, there is now a Create Build button to initiate a build. So once you select this Create Build button, you could then point to a specific branch here. Before, we could only build from the master branch, but now we could select the branch. So since I was working in my Feature 5 branch earlier, I'll go ahead and select that. And then I could select the target from the branch. So I'll just select my engineer target because that's the one that I want to build for my project. And then I could select build. And then when that target is built, you'll have a clear view of all the builds for your project and also the branch that it came from. So we can have builds from all of our different branches, and we could use these columns to organize the builds according to the branch as well. So for this example, we did build this project through Central, but similarly, if you do build a target from your Flare project for a branch, and then publish that output from Flare directly into Central, you will also see that branch column, that associated branch listed here in the branch column. Now also, if you hit these ellipses next to the build to the left, and then if you select a view profile, you can find all the information for that build, such as the branch that it came from, and also if it was built from Flare or from Central. So all of this information was on this builds page before, but it was sort of all in different places. So this build profile displays it all in one place for you. Now, if you open up your Central instance and then you check out this builds page and you notice that this branch column isn't here when you open it, you'll want to hit this gear icon to open up the column option settings. And you'll want to make sure that this branch column is enabled. Let me close out of this here. So while we're here on the projects, I'd also like to switch over to the Files tab, where you can preview your project files that's saved here in Central. You'll notice at the top that we added this drop down so you could select which files from a branch that you'd like to preview. And also, if you switch over to the commits page, you will also see that this branch drop down was added here as well, so that you could view all of the commits for your project, but you can keep them separated and organized by your different branches. All right, so after we build our output for our particular branch, we can also create a site out of that build, and that way we can create live or privatized sites from the branch and have other people review it. And this is great because as we have our live sites to our end users, we can create these separate sites and share them with our internal team or managers. And that way they can view what that output would look like with that branch content added without affecting the current sites from the master branch that are actually live to our end users. So we'll navigate here from the projects tab into the sites tab. And when we create or edit a site, you'll see where we made these updates. So you could select the branch that the output is from. So I'll just select this plus button here at the top to create a site. I'll name it I'll call it Feature 5 site. I'll add a vanity URL here, so I'll just put Feature 5. And that way it's obvious in the URL that this site is for a specific feature. And then I'll go ahead and select build in this dropdown. So I'll first select my project here, which is my role help project at the top. And then I will select my target. So since I built my engineer target earlier, I will go ahead and select that. And then I could select the branch. And since we built from our Feature 5 branch earlier, I'll select Feature 5. And then finally, I could select build. So I can't select any of these previous builds that we have completed before. Or if I just want this site to display the latest and newest content, I could select latest build. And then I'll set this to live after we've configured those settings. And then finally, it's likely that we won't want the entire public to be able to see this site, so I could set this to a privatized output. So with this, only people who are invited to view the site, maybe like internal team members, have the ability to access this. So when I save this site to create it, you will then see the site profile pop up, which is also new. Now, before this release, we didn't really have this kind of overview to manage the site. You could also access the site profile by simply just clicking on the site here. But this profile shows all the information about the site in a single place. So in the upper left, you'll see the site name. You'll see the live URL. You'll see the build ID, even when this site was set to live. You can also use the site profile settings to associate the site with a specific team for those privatized outputs. And you could even delete the site at the very bottom. So we put all the information for the site in one place here to save you a couple of clicks when you need to manage this. Let me exit out of this. So that's how we set up, so that's how we build and set up a site for those branches. Now I'd like to go back into the review tab here to show that we also made enhancements to the topic review filter. Now, instead of a simple filter dropdown, you will now see a filter option in the top right, which you can click to open up a small dialog, which will help you find specific topics. And that's going to be especially useful when looking for reviewed topics here in this archive tab. I'd also like to mention that subject matter experts will also see this filter option on their end as well. But now within this dialog, you can begin typing in the search field a topic name, a path, a project, or review owner. And this will quickly adjust the file pane to the left as we're typing. So I could just type in a topic name here. I'll put basic steps. And then it will pull up the topics with this file name. But as you could see from this list here, this topic has been reviewed quite a bit. So we can narrow down this list even more with those other options. I'll open up that filter again. And in this first field here, this lets you quickly select a Flare project. So if I have a topic called basic steps in multiple Flare projects that I have, I can limit these results even more here. I could also select a date related to when that topic was sent out for review. And we also have a drop down here, which gives us a couple more options. So on shows files sent on that specific date that we specify. Before shows files sent before the specific date selected. And after shows files sent after the specific date that we select. And you could also use the sort section to organize a list of files by name, path, project, or sent on date. And there's also a toggle button that I can select to sort by descending or ascending order. And when we're done filtering, we can remove the active filters by hitting this X button here, or we could go back into this filter dialog and then we could select clear to clear that all out. So now with this new enhancement, it's much easier to pinpoint those review files that we want to find. And as our content scales and this review archive list grows over time, we can refine our search in this review history here. So I know that we covered a lot here, and if after this webinar, some of your heads are still spinning, we do have some new videos found on our MadCap website that are very helpful. So if you open up the website, and if you go into this resources tab here, select videos and tutorials. And then if you select MadCap Flare videos, and then scroll to the bottom, I believe it's the third section from the bottom here, you will see there is an 11-part series of everything that you need to know on source control, including a bunch of videos on branching. So go ahead and check that out. There's a lot of great stuff in there. And that concludes what's new for this release. We hope that you all get the chance to download the new version, Hopefully you all find these features useful and central, and hopefully this gave you some good ideas on how to optimize your Flare workflow by using branching and source control. Now we see that there are a lot of great questions feeding in, which is great. Just a couple things before we get to those questions here. I'd like to mention that MadCap has a special promotion. So when you purchase over $5,000 by the end of the month until January 31st, you can be qualified to save 10% on your next purchase before March 31st, 2022. So this includes when you purchase certified training, when you register for our Mad World conference, and if you purchase any additional licenses. So feel free to reach out to your sales rep if you want to learn more or if you have any questions about this limited time offer. And one more thing. So we're excited to have our annual Mad World conference this year in Austin, Texas, from June 12th to June 15th, 2022. It's been a while since we were able to have this, so we're really excited to see you all there. If you register by March 31st, save up to $300 on your conference registration. So contact us if you want to learn more about that. All right, so we are seeing a lot of great questions coming in. We may not be able to get to them in the time that we have left, but we'll try to cover the questions that are commonly asked here. So let's go ahead and check some of these out.
I see a good one here. I see a question that says, can the branches be used to also make design changes so you can build the site to preview skin changes without these changes going live? Then merge those design changes to master branch? And the answer is yes. That's actually a great example of using branching. You can create a branch to do some design changes. You could even create a branch to reorganize your Content Explorer. So it's essentially any of the work that you want to manage separately from your master that would be released to the general public. So yes, in order to create styling changes, that's a great example of using branching within Flare.
Here's another one. Is there a difference between a commit and a push? So yeah, there is a difference. So you want to think of commit as a local server save, whereas a push is actually placing those commits up on the remote repository. So if you're using Central, that push is actually what's going to save those changes in the project that's saved in Central.
And I see another one. How can I prevent a Flare user from creating, editing, or deleting branches? Is that part of the user security in Central? And the answer is not currently. So there wouldn't be any user permission settings for this in Central. But the nice thing about source control is that if some user were to delete a branch, for example, you always have that version history, so you can always roll back to that commit and you can reintroduce the branch back into the project.
Here's another one. So is the branch a separate project? It's a great question. So the branch isn't actually going to be a separate Flare project. It's sort of like a separate Flare project since you can be working in parallel to the master branch, but it is saved along with within that same project. So it's not completely a separate set of files.
I see another one here. We are dual bound with Git and Central so that we can manage branching. So is a binding to Git still required with these new updates to Central? And the answer is no. With the branching support within Central, now isn't required for you to be connected to your own Git repository in order to utilize branching features. So in that case, you could be single bound to MadCap Central.
Right. Here's another one. So does this all work for Git, not just MadCap Central? Well, yes, so Git does support branching, so you can bind to a Git repository from Flare. But there are advantages of using branching with Central, such as managing it in Central, but also being able to review those branches and building those outputs from those branches as well in MadCap Central.
Oh, here's a question. Can you move or enlarge the status bar? So not currently. So it is going to be placed in the bottom. However, most of those features or those functions that are included in the status bar can also be executed from the source control ribbon as well. So you kind of do have two separate locations to use those features and functionality.
Here's another one here. Can you make new topics when you're in a branch? So yes, so although when we were working on this on our project earlier, we were editing topics that were already within our master branch, but you can create new topics in your branches. So if you have a new topic for your new feature, for a new release, that can be created when you switch over to your new branch.
Here's one. Can you have multiple users create sub-branches from a share branch? Yes. So you can have, say, for example, a release branch, and then multiple users can create their own branches off of the release branches. So it's kind of like their own workspace based off the release. And then those users would be able to merge their branches together or merge their branches back into the release. So yes, you could have user-specific sub-branches as well.
Here's another one. Is there a maximum number of branches allowed? So there isn't actually a limit to how many branches you can create. You could have as many as you want, but as you have a lot of branches, it would probably be a good idea to manage those and maybe delete them if necessary if you don't need that branch anymore. And if it's already been merged into the master branch, that's probably a good reason to go ahead and clean those up.
Yeah, what happens if different users are working on two separate branches and there's a merge conflict? So then there will be a dialog that pops up within Flare, and it will be a conflict resolution dialog. So there will be some options there. You can either auto merge all of the changes, or you can see the server version of the file and your local version of the file, and you would be able to choose which version you would like to push as the correct version into Central.
Here's another one. Can you restrict other authors from making changes in branches or merging branches? So there aren't currently any settings to restrict users from editing branches, but if there were any changes that were completed that you don't want in the project, you can essentially roll back to a previous commit or a previous state of where the project was at before it was merged or edited. And that also applies if a user deletes or adds a branch that you don't need as well. And here's another one. Can review topics be sent to multiple reviewers at the same time? And that's a yes. So you can send your topic for review, whether it's in a branch or not in a branch, or whether it's in one of your branches or your main project branch. You could send it to multiple reviewers at the same time, so multiple people can work on it. And also, in that when multiple people are reviewing that topic at the same time, everyone will be able to see everybody's changes in real time. It's kind of like a Google Docs experience. So other authors could collaborate, or other subject matter experts can collaborate together, and that way nobody's stepping over each other's work. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I see one here. Did the central button move, or is it just considered another source control? So the central button is still in the view ribbon. It's in the same location. You'll still have that MadCap Central panel, but if you're single bound to MadCap Central, then you can also use that source control ribbon. So both exist. You can, upload your changes from the MadCap Central panel, or you can also utilize the source control ribbon within Flare to push and pull from Central. Thanks, Gio.
Yep.
Oh, here's another one. Does branching affect global project linking? Not necessarily. So with your global project as well as your child projects, those would be separate repositories. So you would have, for each one of those projects, you would have a separate repository. And so you can manage branching within your global as well as your child projects kind of independently or together if you choose. But there wouldn't really be any effect on the linking of those two projects.
Here is another one, going back to central review. So is there a report that shows the review status of topics? So actually back in MadCap Flare, I'm sharing my screen again here. If you open up this file reviews tab, and then I know we were in the inbox earlier because we were looking for files that were sent back to us. But if you want to look at the files that you sent out and the status of those, you could go into the sent, you could use this dropdown to open up the sent files option here. So you could check on the status of those files that you sent out. I don't have anything here in this list because all my files were sent back to me, but this is where you'd find that information. You could also see the files that you sent out yourself. And if you hit this drop down, if you select all, you could see all the review files sent from other authors on your central license as well. Another one, after topics have been sent for SME review to Central, can you add additional reviewers at a later time once the review has started? And as of right now, no, so after you send those topics out for review, you can't add additional reviewers, but after those reviewers review that file and submit it back to you, you could quickly send that out to the next batch of subject matter experts that you need to look at that file.
Here's one. Do all users have access to all branches? So that would be all authors within Central and all users of Flare that are working in a Central Bound project. Yes, they would be able to access all branches that have been pushed to the repository. So anything that you're working in locally that has not yet been published, that would be specific to you, but anything that has been pushed into Central would be available to all other users and they'd be able to access them.
Here's another one here. Does Central support a review workflow for coworkers without central access? and flare access. So if your reviewers are not a subject matter expert in Central, there is another workflow using MadCap Contributor, which is a locally installed software, but it sort of involves the same steps of sending a file out for review to them. They would just open it on their end on their local machine, make your reviews, and then send it back to the Flare author. And you can also send files from a branch into MadCap Contributor as well. So there are two different workflows there, in the cloud using Central or a locally installed software using MadCap Contributor. List to see if we have a few more here.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through. I think that we've addressed most of these.
All right. Well, looks like we addressed most of the questions here, and I know that we are approaching the end of the hour, so we'll leave the question field open for a few more moments here to get them in, and we'll make sure to follow up with responses after the webinar here, and we'll also give you all 10 minutes back on your day. But I'd just like to thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Keaton, for tag teaming this with me.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.